May it please the court. Good morning. My name is Christian Strickland. I'm an attorney. I practice in Biloxi, Mississippi. Just like to say a few brief words of introduction regarding our speaker today, Judge Louis Guirola. Judge Guirola currently serves as the U.S. District Court Judge for the Southern District of Mississippi. He was nominated by George W. Bush on September 23rd, 2003. He was confirmed by the Senate in 2004 and received commission also in 2004. He served as Chief Judge from 2010 to 2017. He also previously served in the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Texas. He currently serves in the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court from 2019 to present, and the Alien Terrorist Removal Court from 2021 to present. He attended William Carey College and the Ole Miss Law School. He was engaged in private practice from 79 to 80, and 1986 to 1990 he served as Assistant District Attorney, and from 1980 to 1984, among other various positions. And so we just really want to thank Judge Guirola for coming to speak to us this morning. And Bishop, we thank you for the opportunity to have this Red Mass, and thank you to all of our city and local state officials for coming today as well. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Christian, for that very kind introduction. And I also want to thank Bishop Kinnaman for his kind invitation and this opportunity to address the congregation and my fellow brothers and sisters in the legal profession at this year's celebration of the Red Mass. I've been an attorney for 43 years. And for 29 of those years, I have served as a federal judge. In my time as a judge, I've had the privilege of speaking at law schools, colleges, and universities, before public and private, court, and governmental organizations in numerous countries on 4 separate continents. But I must confess that until today, in response to the kind invitation of the bishop to speak here in this beautiful cathedral, not until now have I experienced true public speaking terror. Talk about pressure. I know that most of you already are aware of the significance of the celebration of the Red Mass. We also know that the first recorded Red Mass was held in the Cathedral of Paris in 1245, and that the Red Mass tradition began in England around 1310 with a Mass offered at the Westminster Abbey. To place this in historical and chronological perspective, consider this: 250 years before Columbus discovered America, the Church celebrated and honored the Holy Spirit as the source of wisdom, understanding, counsel, and fortitude, those gifts which shine forth in the dispensing of justice in the courtroom as well as in the individual lawyer's office. A brief comment, Bishop, on today's gospel. As Jesus instructs in the gospel, we are called to be persistent in prayer, persistent in seeking justice, and resilient in everything we do. I want to point out an example which is particularly significant here on this particular day. Paulina Bandy is a lawyer in the state of California. Her professional accomplishment is particularly noteworthy. Paulina Bandy failed the California bar exam 13 times before finally finding success on the 14th try. No doubt, she is persistent in prayer. She is, by any objective measure, both resilient and persistent. Even more impressive, she now hosts a successful website, and get this, its purpose is to help law students pass the bar. Now, before I begin my comments, I need to confess to my fellow lawyers, judges, students of the law, and all here assembled, I do not pretend to have any great wisdom. I do not have all the answers. I do not presume to speak for the court or represent the court or the church or any legal organization or institution. Instead, I'm just an older lawyer who's been given an opportunity to speak to concepts and ideas that are not new. In fact, what I have to impart today, you've already heard before, probably many times. And many of these concepts and ideas have equal application to those of you who are not engaged in the practice of law. But it is sometimes useful to review, to reevaluate, to reconsider, and to ask questions, and hopefully to be moved and reminded of our responsibilities, not only to the profession and to our community, but also to God. For those of us who are called to be lawyers, what role should our faith play? What does it mean to be a Christian lawyer? It seems that today many lawyers and law students are disillusioned with their work, unhappy with their lifestyle, and doubtful about the wisdom of their choice in careers. A sense of meaning, of service, of pride at a job well done, all these are getting harder and harder to find and to maintain. Many lawyers feel that their role has degenerated. No longer are lawyers viewed by the public as an independent counsel of law. Today the perception is that lawyers are no more than a hired gun, win at any cost, and obligated to do whatever the client wants, regardless of the lawyer's own values and morals. So it is fair to ask, is the practice of law as a profession in a spiritual crisis? Has public esteem for lawyers hit rock bottom? It seems that movies and comedians routinely get big laughs by ridiculing lawyers. But this is nothing new. Here's what Mark Twain said about lawyers. A good lawyer knows the law. A clever one takes the judge to lunch. Here's what Will Rogers, the great satirist, once said. I don't think you can make a lawyer honest by an act of legislature. You've got to work on his conscience, and his lack of conscience is what makes him a lawyer. Now bear in mind that Will Rogers, who I just quoted, is the person who once said, I never met a man I didn't like. We judges are not immune from criticism. Here's what Jonathan Swift, the author of Gulliver's Travels, in 1726 says about judges. He says that judges are picked from the most dexterous lawyers who are grown old and lazy, and having been biased all their lives against truth or equity, are under such a fatal necessity of favoring, fraud, perjury, and oppression, that I have known several of them to refuse a large bribe on the side where justice lay, rather than injure the faculty by doing anything unbecoming their nature in the office. And last but not least, who can forget the first unfortunate person to be eaten by a T-Rex at Jurassic Park was a fellow described as the blood-sucking lawyer. A series of highly publicized circus trials like the O.J. Simpson case have eroded public confidence not only in lawyers and judges, but also in the legal system itself. Statistics paint a very troubling picture of the profession. In 2016, reports surveying 3,300 law students from 15 separate law schools, this survey found that 25% of the law students were at risk for alcoholism. 17% of these law students suffered from depression. 37% of law students reported mild to severe anxiety, and 6% of the law students reported having suicidal thoughts in the prior year. More than 13,000 working lawyers responded to the same survey and reported that 28% of the lawyers suffered from depression. 19% of the lawyers had severe anxiety. More recently, the 2020 edition of the American Bar Association Profile of the Profession reports that 21% of the lawyers qualify as problem drinkers, which is more than 3 times the rate for the general population and nearly double the rate for any other highly educated professionals. And that survey result also shows that 25% to 30% of lawyers facing disciplinary charges suffer from some type of addiction or mental illness. Now, is it all gloom and doom? Is there a fix? Perhaps we should consider a move from law as a practice to law as a calling. If the law is or can be a calling, what does that mean for lawyers? What are the implications? May I suggest that if lawyers are facing a spiritual crisis, perhaps they need a spiritual response. The concept of a calling invites those of us in the legal profession to take a second look at what we do, to see the ways in which our work contributes to the good of the client as well as to the good of society. Consider that when lawyers see their work as a calling, the lawyer who approaches the work as a calling still spends his time meeting with clients, doing research, drafting documents, and resolving disputes. They're still guided by the codes of professional responsibility, and they still zealously advocate for the client. However, in another sense, when a lawyer approaches work as a calling, the lawyer now sees himself in a different light. The job has a different, wider frame of meaning. The idea of a calling gives lawyers a new way of seeing their work and a new way of seeing themselves as human beings. Consider one of the key implications of approaching the practice of law as a calling. The idea of a calling puts an end to the illusion that what we do at work is unconnected to what we do with the rest of our lives. Lawyers and other professionals are in peril of living a sort of compartmentalized life. In other words, they may tend to build walls between parts of their lives so that they become not one person with many roles and responsibilities, but they become different persons depending upon the specific role that they assume. In other words, they separate their personal life from their professional life. In effect, they split themselves into two persons. They become one person at home and on the weekends, and another tougher, meaner person at work. At home, they are good spouses, friends, parents, and neighbors. They give generously to their community. They try not to lie, cheat, or mistreat others. But at work, they feel compelled to be aggressive, combative, and manipulative. At work, the dog-eat-dog mentality and the don't blame me, I was only following the rules excuse guides them. It amounts to a schizophrenic practice, and the calling breaks down these walls. This schizophrenic lifestyle is ultimately unsustainable and unstable. The idea of a law practice as a calling breaks down these walls that compartmentalize life into these neat pigeonholes that we label home, work, religion, and so on. The idea of a calling also affects the way a lawyer looks at ethical issues. It naturally broadens moral horizons. When lawyers lack a sense of calling, they are tempted to see themselves as having responsibilities only to themselves or to their clients. They become just another so-called hired gun. On the other hand, the idea of a calling reminds lawyers that they cannot abandon moral responsibility for their actions. The lawyer is concerned about justice and whether the actions they undertake advance or impede the pursuit of justice. The lawyer who views his practice as a calling does not believe that whatever is done for a client is somehow immune from moral scrutiny. Instead, the lawyer understands that he is a moral agent accountable for his actions. A lawyer who regards himself as having a calling cannot help but see clients differently. A client is not merely a commodity, but a human being in pain and emotional turmoil who has come to the lawyer for help. I suggest that the concept of a calling gives lawyers a kind of moral compass. It constantly reminds the lawyer that his ultimate loyalty is not simply to a client or to a code of professional conduct, but also to God. The idea of a calling also lends naturally to an emphasis on healing in the resolution of conflicts. We usually think of lawyers as zealous partisans of their clients, what I have already referred to as a hired gun. But I would like to suggest a concept that may be obvious, but may often be overlooked. Lawyers should and can be healers of human conflict just as much as they are courtroom wizards. Former United States Supreme Court Chief Justice Warren Burger explained the image of lawyers as a healer in these words, and I quote, "The entire legal profession, lawyers, judges, law teachers, has become so mesmerized with the stimulation of the courtroom contest that we tend to forget that we ought to be healers of conflicts. Doctors, in spite of astronomical medical costs, still retain a high degree of public confidence because they are perceived as healers. Should lawyers not be healers? Healers, not warriors. Healers, not procurers. Healers, not hired guns. As part of the calling, Christian lawyers should be servants. Lawyers should be servants in our communities, in our civic associations, in our schools. At times, lawyers will find themselves in a difficult situation, fighting a tough problem, a tough argument, or a tough old judge. At those times, remember that good deeds have a definite purpose, the glory of God. To be sure, a lawyer who assists an inventor in setting up a corporation is doing a good thing. A lawyer who counsels a teenager who has had his first brush with the law is doing a good thing. A lawyer who strives to vindicate the rights of a woman unfairly terminated from her job is doing a good thing. In difficulty, we should not hesitate to ask for God's assistance, not only for ourselves and for the cause of justice, but so we can present our work as a gift to God. In legal representation, a lawyer should realize that the most excellent servant to the client is one who thinks through the moral and legal implications of a problem and truly counsels the client, more than simply ensuring legal victory. The Christian attorney glorifies God by incorporating the values of care and compassion with faithful, zealous representation of the client's interests. Lawyers also have an especial duty to reach out, as the Lord has taught us, to the underprivileged and the dispossessed. When a lawyer uses his skills to serve others, surely God is glorified. We should always remember that under the stress of the legal profession, it is easy to get caught up in your own experiences, losing perspective and balance. Thus, remember to be humble. Agree that it is okay to disagree, but not to be mean. The reality is that lawyers are going to disagree with opposing counsel, other attorneys, and even judges. A good relationship is not the absence of conflict, rather it is how one reacts to conflict. Consider, do you really need to send that sarcastic email? How about that condescending voicemail? Is a shouting match outside the courtroom going to move the case forward? Instead of giving in to the quick impulse to respond negatively, take a breath, calmly, listen to the other side's position. Strive to understand before you try to be understood. I will leave you with this. When it comes right down to it, lawyers are no different than any other people. They want to have a successful career, provide for their family, and contribute to their community and their world. They want to experience a sense of pride and meaning in what they do. They do not want to be one person at church on Sunday and a different, tougher, meaner person at the office on Monday. They want to be both a good lawyer and a good Christian. I suggest that we need to acknowledge that the practice of law, and for that matter every other profession, vocation, or occupation, has spiritual significance. That we are called to serve God and each other in everything we do. To build a bridge over the chasm that separates faith from work, and to take a step toward bringing the two together. If the crisis that plagues the legal profession is primarily spiritual, then more than anything else, the lawyer needs a way to link what they do on the job with their deepest Christian values and commitments. In other words, we need to reconnect what we do on Monday with what we profess and pray on Sunday. In other words, we need to bring God to work. Have you ever asked yourselves why the terms Christian with lawyer seem hard for some to accept? Is the phrase Christian lawyer an oxymoron, like crash landing, a minor miracle, or a jumbo shrimp? Consider this. If you bring your religious values with you to the office tomorrow, what might occur? Perhaps your law practice will have a wider and deeper frame of meaning. Perhaps you will no longer be a lawyer who happens to be a Christian on Sunday, but instead a follower of Christ, who is trying to live out his Christian calling within his role as a lawyer. I suggest a small rearrangement of just a few words, but with great significance, to move from a lawyer who is a Christian to a Christian who is also a lawyer. Bishop, thank you very much. Thank you for your attention.